I discovered $245,000 had vanished from our family plumbing business overnight. My older brother Brock used a forged power of attorney to clear the accounts, using an alt for obvious reasons. Specifics adjusted, the receipts are not. I'm Dean, age 34, a master plumber and the youngest son who actually ran the daily operations at Hank & Sons Plumbing in Columbus, Ohio. Before we dive into how I completely dismantled his life, make sure to subscribe for more crazy family legal drama. My father Hank started the plumbing business back in 1998 with a single beat-up cargo van and a box of pipe wrenches. I grew up in the back of that van. By the time I turned 18, I knew how to clear a main sewer line with my eyes closed. My older brother Brock, however, considered manual labor to be completely beneath his dignity. He was the golden child of the family. My parents saved every spare dollar from the business to send Brock to a prestigious business school, hoping he would become some high-flying corporate executive. Brock spent 4 years getting a marketing degree, another 2 years floating around doing unpaid internships, and eventually took a mid-level desk job that he hated. Meanwhile, I stayed behind in Columbus. I skipped college, got my plumbing license, and spent 60 hours a week digging trenches, sweating copper pipes, and building a loyal customer base. Over 12 years, I helped my dad expand the business from a two-man operation into a highly profitable local brand. We had 5 service trucks on the road, 4 full-time technicians, and a commercial shop space in a thriving industrial park. Dad and I had a firm verbal agreement. He owned 60% of the business, and I owned 40%. The plan was for Dad to retire at age 65, at which point I would buy out his remaining shares using the company profits, keeping the business entirely in my hands. Brock had absolutely no involvement in the day-to-day work, nor did he want any. He openly mocked my career choices at family dinners, calling me a glorified janitor, while he flaunted his rented city apartments and designer suits. Everything changed 2 years ago when Dad started showing undeniable signs of early-stage cognitive decline. He began forgetting customer appointments. He misplaced keys. He accidentally ordered $15,000 worth of commercial water heaters that we had no use for. It broke my heart to see it. I talked to Dad privately, and we both agreed it was time for him to step back from the field. I took over the scheduling, the bidding, and the heavy physical labor entirely. When Brock realized Dad was becoming vulnerable, his corporate arrogance suddenly transformed into intense family devotion. He began visiting Dad's house every single evening. He volunteered to handle Dad's mail, his medical appointments, and his personal bills. I initially thought Brock was finally stepping up to be a good brother. I was completely wrong. Brock was simply positioning himself to intercept the family assets before anyone else could look at the books. The first major red flag appeared during our annual summer planning meeting. Brock showed up at our shop driving a brand new, metallic black $72,000 GMC Yukon. He walked into the front office wearing a shiny new watch and expensive leather boots. I looked out the window at his luxury SUV and asked him how his marketing job was paying for a vehicle like that. Brock just laughed, waved his hand, and told me that he had landed a major consulting gig on the side. He then announced that since Dad was no longer capable of managing the business finances, he would be stepping in to handle our corporate accounting and payroll as a favor to the family. I told Brock that we already had a trusted local accounting firm handling our taxes and payroll. Brock got incredibly defensive. He raised his voice and said that outside accountants were overcharging us, and as the eldest son with a business degree, it was his duty to protect Dad's interests. Dad was sitting in the corner of the office during this argument, looking confused and exhausted. He just nodded along with Brock, saying that Brock went to college and knew about numbers. Against my better judgment, I let it slide because I was buried under a massive commercial plumbing contract for a new 40-unit apartment complex. I simply did not have the hours in the day to fight my brother over spreadsheet access while running 5 crews on site. Within 3 months, subtle changes began occurring in our corporate environment. Brock insisted on routing all company mail to a private post office box he opened near his apartment, rather than having it delivered to our physical shop. He claimed it was to prevent important invoices from getting lost in the messy shop office. Then, our field technicians started complaining that their corporate expense cards were getting declined at the supply houses. Our lead tech, a guy named Marcus who had been with us for 6 years, called me from the counter of Ferguson Supply. He told me that the cashier wouldn't release a $4,800 order of commercial valves because our account was 60 days past due. I was completely shocked. Our company generated excellent cash flow, and we always paid our suppliers within 10 days to receive a prompt payment discount. I called Brock immediately to demand an explanation. Brock answered the phone from a noisy, high-end steakhouse downtown. He told me to calm down and claimed it was just a temporary glitch with the bank's automated clearinghouse system. He said he would wire the funds immediately and told me to stop micromanaging the administrative side of the company. I wanted to believe him, but my gut told me something was deeply wrong. I decided to investigate the situation quietly without tipping Brock off. I contacted our primary bank, where we had maintained our corporate operating accounts for over 2 decades. I asked the branch manager for a complete set of physical bank statements for the past 6 months. Because I was a documented 40% owner and an authorized signer on the business accounts, she printed them out for me right there at the desk. As I sat in my truck in the bank parking lot, flipping through the pages, my stomach dropped. The operational account had been systematically drained. There were multiple online transfers of $10,000, $15,000, and $20,000 moving out of our business account every single week. The destination was a private personal checking account that I did not recognize. Over the course of just 90 days, a grand total of $245,000 had been cleared out of Hank and Sons Plumbing. Our primary business account, which usually maintained a healthy cushion of at least $100,000 to cover payroll and materials, currently held a balance of exactly $412. I looked closer at the authorization signatures on the large wire transfers. They were completely digital, authorized via a secure online banking token that had been assigned to my father. But I knew for a fact that my father did not even know how to log into his online banking app anymore. I drove straight to Dad's house to confront him gently and see what he knew. When I arrived, Brock's luxury SUV was parked in the driveway. I walked through the front door and found Brock sitting at the kitchen table with a stack of legal documents, guiding our father's trembling hand to sign the bottom of a page. I stepped into the room and asked Brock exactly what he was doing. Brock quickly flipped the document face down, stood up, and told me that he was just helping Dad sign some routine medical insurance paperwork. I looked at my father and asked him if he knew how much money was currently left in the plumbing business account. Dad looked at me blankly, rubbed his forehead, and said that Brock was taking care of the money now, and that Brock said we were doing great. Brock grabbed my arm, pulled me into the hallway, and told me that I had no right to come into Dad's house and stress him out. He told me to go back to fixing toilets and leave the high-level financial management to the people who actually understood business. I looked my own brother in the eye and told him that I knew about the missing $245,000. Brock didn't even flinch. A cold, smug smile crossed his face. He reached into his leather briefcase, pulled out a certified legal document, and held it up right in front of my face. It was a durable power of attorney, fully executed, stamped by a licensed notary public, and signed with what looked exactly like our father's signature. Brock told me that Dad had granted him full legal power of attorney over all his personal assets and his 60% share of the plumbing business 2 months ago. He told me that, as the majority stakeholder's legal representative, he had absolute authority to manage the corporate funds however he saw fit. He said that he was restructuring the company, and if I didn't like how he ran things, I could take my 40% minority share and hit the road. He openly admitted that he had transferred the $245,000 into a secure personal account to protect it from my reckless spending on new tools and truck maintenance. He told me that I was completely powerless to stop him. I walked out of that house completely devastated, but I refused to let my anger cloud my judgment. I knew that if I filed a standard police report or tried to argue with him openly, he would simply use Dad's funds to hire a massive corporate defense lawyer, dragging the case out for years while the plumbing business collapsed into bankruptcy. I needed a clean, undeniable, legal countermove that would strip him of his power without destroying the operational assets I had spent my entire adult life building. While Brock was busy feeling untouchable and spending our company money on fine dining and luxury car payments, he completely overlooked one critical detail. He assumed that because Hank and Sons Plumbing operated out of the commercial shop building in the industrial park, the business owned the real estate. It did not. We had been leasing that building from an elderly landlord named Mr. Henderson for the past 10 years. A year prior, Mr. Henderson had approached my father and me, offering to sell the physical building and the land for $310,000 because he wanted to liquidate his real estate portfolio and move to Florida. Dad didn't want to take on the extra debt at his age, but he told me that if I wanted to buy it personally, I should go right ahead. I had used my personal savings, secured a private commercial mortgage, and purchased the building entirely under my own independent real estate holding company, which I called Apex Properties LLC. Hank and Sons Plumbing paid a monthly rent of $4,500 directly to my LLC. My father knew about this arrangement, but Brock had never bothered to look at the commercial lease agreements or the property deed records. To Brock, the shop was just a building where the trucks parked. I realized that Brock's arrogance had handed me the perfect legal lever. I spent the next 4 days working quietly with a brilliant corporate attorney and a certified forensic handwriting expert. I provided the expert with dozens of old invoices, tax returns, and personal checks that my father had hand-signed over the past decade. The expert compared them to the signature on the durable power of attorney that Brock had used to drain the bank accounts. Within 48 hours, the expert issued a formal report concluding that the signature on Brock's document was an undeniable forgery, likely traced from an old corporate document. Furthermore, we discovered that the notary public who had stamped the document was actually a close college friend of Brock who worked at a local car dealership. Armed with this evidence, I didn't rush to the police station just yet. First, I checked the financial records of my real estate holding company. Because Brock had stopped paying our suppliers, he had also conveniently forgotten to pay the monthly commercial rent to Apex Properties LLC for the past 2 months. The business was currently $9,000 in arrears on its lease. I sat down in my truck and executed my proactive strategy. Acting strictly in my legal capacity as the sole owner and landlord of Apex Properties LLC, I drafted a formal 3-day notice to pay rent or quit, followed immediately by an emergency commercial eviction filing based on non-payment of rent and the unauthorized storage of hazardous industrial waste on the property. Brock had been storing dozens of old, corroded commercial water heaters in the back lot, violating local environmental codes that I had previously warned him about. On a Friday afternoon, while Brock was away at a weekend golf resort in Michigan that he had paid for using our corporate credit card, I put my plan into motion. I called all 4 of our full-time plumbing technicians and our office secretary into the shop for an emergency meeting. I laid out the physical bank statements on the table and showed them exactly how Brock had drained $245,000 from the company, leaving us unable to pay our suppliers or guarantee next week's payroll. The guys were absolutely furious. They had worked alongside me for years, and they knew how hard we had all labored to build the company reputation. I told them that Hank and Sons Plumbing was effectively compromised, but that I was not going to let them lose their livelihoods. I pulled out a stack of pre-prepared employment contracts for my new independent entity, Apex Plumbing Services, LLC, which I had legally registered months ago as a backup plan. I offered every single technician an immediate position with identical pay, full benefits, and a $2,000 signing bonus. Every single one of them signed the contracts on the spot. We spent the next 6 hours clearing out the entire facility. We used our master keys to load all 5 service trucks with every single piece of valuable equipment, including our $12,000 high-resolution sewer cameras, our commercial drain jetters, and thousands of dollars worth of Milwaukee power tools and copper inventory. Because I was a 40% owner of the plumbing business and had personally purchased the vast majority of those tools with my own field earnings, I had every legal right to secure the equipment. We drove the trucks to a secure, private lot that I had leased down the road under my new company name. Once the building was completely empty, I hired a commercial locksmith to change every single lock on the office doors, the warehouse bays, and the main perimeter security gates. I prominently posted the legal eviction notices and the private property no trespassing signs across the front entrance. Hank and Sons Plumbing was officially locked out of its physical location, stripped of its staff, and deprived of its tools. On Monday morning at 8:00 a.m., Brock rolled up to the industrial park in his luxury SUV, expecting to walk into the office and lord his power over me once again. Instead, he found the heavy iron gates locked shut with a thick steel chain and a massive laminated legal notice bearing his name pinned to the center of the fence. My phone started ringing instantly. I answered it on the second ring, staying completely calm. Brock was screaming so loudly into the receiver that I had to hold the phone away from my ear. He called me every name in the book, shouting that I was ruining Dad's business and threatening to have me arrested for commercial trespassing and theft of company property. I let him scream until he ran out of breath. Then, I spoke in a low, even tone. I told him that he was welcome to call the police whenever he liked, but he should probably read the property deed first. I informed him that he was currently standing on private property owned exclusively by Apex Properties LLC, and that the tenant, Hank and Sons Plumbing, had been formally evicted for non-payment of rent and severe code violations. I told him that if he stepped past the locked gate, I would have the local sheriff arrest him for criminal trespassing within 10 minutes. Brock sputtered, stammering that he had the power of attorney and that he controlled the business shares. I told him that his little piece of paper was completely worthless. I informed him that my attorney had already filed a formal emergency petition with the probate court to freeze my father's estate assets, backed by a certified forensic handwriting report proving that he had forged Dad's signature. I also mentioned that the local district attorney's financial crimes unit was currently reviewing the wire transfers linking the missing $245,000 directly to his personal checking account, along with a fraud complaint against his notary public friend. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. The arrogant, untouchable corporate brother vanished in an instant, replaced by a terrified man who realized he had walked directly into a legal minefield of his own making. 2 days later, Brock's personal defense attorney contacted my lawyer, desperately begging for a settlement. Brock knew that if the forensic handwriting report was presented to a grand jury, he was looking at multiple felony counts of grand larceny, bank fraud, and forgery, which carried a mandatory minimum sentence in state prison. His fancy marketing career and his social standing would be completely eradicated. My attorney delivered our terms, which were entirely non-negotiable. First, Brock had to immediately return every single cent of the $245,000 he had transferred into his personal account, along with an additional $15,000 to cover my private legal fees and the cost of the forensic expert. Second, Brock had to sign a legally binding, irrevocable resignation from any association with Hank and Sons Plumbing and completely renounce his durable power of attorney. Third, he had to execute a formal, court-approved family estate agreement stating that he would waive any future claim or inheritance rights to my father's 60% share of the business, leaving the entirety of the company assets to me. In exchange for his total compliance, I agreed to sign a non-disclosure agreement regarding the financial dispute and refrain from pursuing the criminal forgery charges with the district attorney. It took Brock less than 24 hours to sign the paperwork. The $245,000 was successfully wired back into our secure corporate account, which I immediately transferred into a new financial institution where Brock had absolutely no access. With the capital recovered and the legal title securely in my hands, I formally dissolved the old Hank and Sons entity and rolled everything cleanly into Apex Plumbing Services, LLC. I kept the original logo on the side of the trucks as a tribute to my dad, but the business structure was completely modernized. My technicians didn't miss a single day of work, and our commercial clients never even realized there was a massive war happening behind the scenes. We completed the 40-unit apartment complex contract right on schedule, netting a clean $85,000 profit in the first quarter alone. As for my father, I used a portion of the recovered funds to hire a wonderful, full-time licensed caregiver who stays with him at his house during the day. I visit him every single evening after work, just like we used to do when we were running the service van together. We sit on his back porch, drink coffee, and look at the old photos of our first company truck. His memory has its good days and its bad days, but he is safe, well cared for, and completely protected from financial predators. Brock had to sell his luxury GMC Yukon to pay off his own defense lawyers and cover the debts he had racked up during his 3-month spending spree. He recently moved out of his upscale city apartment and took a low-paying remote data entry job, living in a small rented studio on the outskirts of town. My mother called me last week trying to smooth things over, suggesting that maybe Brock could come back to work for me as an office manager since he has a business degree. I just laughed, told her that my office positions were completely filled by people who actually knew how to tell the truth, and hung up the phone. It is funny how the people who look down on your hard work are always the first ones trying to put their hands in your pockets when the money starts rolling in. If you thought that was wild, just wait until you hear about how my cousin tried to claim my grandfather's vintage car collection by producing a handwritten will written on a paper napkin from an Applebee's restaurant.